My parents sold my late father's tools to fund my brother's wedding, so I built my own business from nothing. And now they're begging for my help. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and my father was the only person who ever believed I'd build something great. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence carried a kind of warmth I've never found anywhere else. He owned a small repair shop on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a cluttered space filled with the smell of engine oil, wood shavings, and metal dust. I used to sit on an old stool and watch him work for hours, his hands moving with a quiet confidence that made even broken things seem alive again. He used to say, "These tools will never fail you, son. It's people you need to be careful with." I didn't fully understand it back then. I just admired the way he treated every wrench and hammer like an old friend. Every dent had a story. Every scratch was a memory. When he passed away suddenly from a heart attack, I remember walking into that same workshop. It felt frozen in time. His gloves still hung by the bench, a half-finished project sat waiting, and the air smelled like him. My mother couldn't stand to go in there, but I found comfort in it. Sitting there surrounded by his tools, I felt like I could still hear his voice guiding me. I promised myself I'd protect them, not just because they were valuable, but because they were him, his legacy, his fingerprints, his soul in solid form. I didn't know it then, but that promise would be tested in ways I never imagined. Because soon, those tools, the last piece of him I had left, would become the center of a betrayal that would change everything, and it all began the day my mother told me she was clearing out the old shop. After my father passed, the house didn't just feel quieter, it felt hollow. My mother stopped cooking the way she used to, stopped laughing at the evening news, stopped being there. She said grief made her tired, but it felt more like indifference. My older brother Ryan, on the other hand, seemed to thrive. Suddenly, every family conversation revolved around his upcoming wedding. My mom called it a blessing in dark times. I tried to help out where I could. I cleaned the workshop, kept my father's tools oiled, and even repaired a few things for neighbors to keep his memory alive. One afternoon, while I was organizing the shelves, my mom walked in for the first time since the funeral. She stood at the door like a stranger. "Why are you still in here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just cold. "It helps me remember him," I said softly. "This place, it still feels like he's here." She sighed. "You need to move on, honey. You're wasting time here. Maybe find a real job, start dating. Ryan's already setting an example." It stung. My father's tools were my anchor, the only thing keeping me from falling apart. But to her, they were just reminders of loss. Soon, she started locking the workshop, saying it was unsafe for me to keep fiddling in there. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations took over everything. Money, attention, conversations. At dinner, all anyone talked about was Ryan's dream ceremony and how proud Dad would have been. I sat there, quiet, my stomach twisting with something ugly. Jealousy, maybe, but mostly grief that had nowhere to go. I didn't realize then that the real storm hadn't even begun. Because the next time I walked into that workshop, something felt off, something missing. The next weekend, I decided to sneak into the workshop early in the morning. The padlock my mom had added was gone, and the door creaked open easily. For a second, I thought maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she realized how much this place meant to me. But when I stepped inside, my chest went hollow. The shelves were bare. The pegboard, where my father's wrenches once hung in perfect order, was stripped clean. The old toolbox, the one with his initials carved into the lid, was gone too. Every single tool, every piece of his legacy, had vanished. I froze in the middle of the empty room, hands shaking as I whispered, "No, no, no, no." It felt like losing him all over again. I stormed into the kitchen where my mom was sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. "Where are Dad's tools?" I demanded. She barely looked up. "Oh, those? We sold them." My heart stopped. "You what?" "Ryan's wedding is coming up," she said, her tone sharp, defensive. "We needed money for the venue deposit. You weren't using them anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Those weren't yours to sell." Her eyes hardened. "Don't talk to me like that. Your father would have wanted them to be useful. not collecting dust in some garage. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. They were all I had left of him. She sighed, annoyed, like I was being dramatic. You're overreacting. You need to grow up. Ryan walked in mid-argument, fixing his tie, pretending to be the peacemaker. Come on, man, he said. It's not a big deal. You don't even fix things anymore. That's when I realized it wasn't just the tools they'd taken. It was my father's memory, sold for table decorations and floral arrangements, and for the first time in my life, I walked out of that house shaking with something I'd never felt before, pure rage. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the lights from Ryan's room, trying to understand how my own family could do something so cruel. My hands kept clenching around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every sound from inside, the laughter, the music, felt like nails on glass. They were celebrating, planning a wedding, while I was mourning again. The next morning, I tried to confront Ryan directly. He was sitting on the porch sipping coffee like nothing had happened. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, voice trembling. He didn't even look guilty. Mom made the call, man. It's not like those tools were doing anything. The money went to something good. Something good? I snapped. You sold Dad's life's work for a party. He scoffed. You're being dramatic. It's just stuff. That phrase, it broke something in me. Just stuff. I walked back inside to grab a photo of Dad from the mantel. My mother caught me at the door and said, You're ruining this family with your attitude. Ryan deserves our support right now. Can't you just be happy for him? Happy? They sold my father's memory for centerpieces and champagne. I wanted to scream that I'd rather eat dirt than celebrate that wedding. Instead, I just said, You'll regret this someday, and left. I still showed up at the ceremony weeks later, mostly because I couldn't stomach the gossip that would follow if I didn't. I stood in the back, dressed in a plain suit, watching everyone smile like the world was perfect. No one spoke to me. No one even looked my way. That night, when the music faded and the lights dimmed, I walked out of the hall and kept walking. No destination, no plan. Just anger burning deep in my chest. That was the night I decided I was done being part of that family. I moved out the next morning. No dramatic goodbye, no note. Just packed a duffel bag and drove until the city skyline disappeared behind me. I found a cramped studio apartment above an auto shop that smelled like grease and mold, but it was cheap, and it was mine. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling judged. Still, that freedom came with silence. Loud, echoing silence that made me miss my father more than ever. Money ran out fast. I picked up odd jobs, fixing appliances, repairing furniture, anything that let me use my hands. People paid little, sometimes only in cash or food, but I didn't care. Every screw I tightened, every hinge I replaced felt like a small rebellion against what my family took from me. I started collecting second-hand tools, rusted, mismatched, nothing like my father's, but I treated them with the same respect he once taught me. At night, I'd sit on the floor surrounded by those tools, staring at the few photos I had left of Dad. I'd whisper, I'm trying, old man. Sometimes it helped. Most nights it didn't. Bills piled up. Some weeks I skipped meals just to keep the lights on. And yet, every struggle came with a strange satisfaction, because for once, my progress belonged only to me. No one could sell this. No one could take it away, but still. Every now and then, I'd dream of the old workshop, of my father's voice saying, measure twice, cut once. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, wishing I could hear him again. And just when I thought I was running on fumes, barely holding myself together, something unexpected found me. A small wooden box, hidden deep inside one of my old moving boxes. My father's handwriting carved faintly on the lid. The box was smaller than I remembered, scratched, faded, and worn at the edges like it had lived a lifetime before I ever touched it. I set it on my kitchen table and just stared for a while, afraid to open it. It felt sacred, like whatever was inside might crumble the moment I broke the seal. When I finally lifted the lid, a soft creak echoed through the empty room. Inside were a few folded papers, yellowed by time, and a single wrench, one I instantly recognized. It was the first tool my dad ever let me use. I could still see the dent near the handle where I dropped it as a kid and cried, thinking I'd ruined it. He'd laughed then, saying, "Now it's yours. It's got your mark on it." Underneath the wrench was a note written in his messy handwriting. "Build something that lasts longer than anger." I must have read that line 100 times. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My father knew me better than anyone. He probably saw that anger in me even back then. The need to prove myself. The bitterness that could eat me alive if I let it. I sat there in silence, holding that wrench like it was made of glass. Then I cried, harder than I had since the funeral. Not just for him, but for everything I'd lost trying to hold on to my pain. That night, I cleaned the wrench and placed it on my desk. The next morning, I took out what little money I had saved and bought a few planks of old wood. I started small, repairing, sanding, carving. The sound of the tools filled my apartment like music. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel broken. I felt guided, but little did I know. That single choice, to pick up a wrench again, would set off a chain of events that changed my life forever. The next few weeks blurred into sawdust and sweat. My apartment turned into a makeshift workshop, scraps of wood stacked against the walls, the smell of varnish hanging thick in the air. I didn't have the right tools, just a few cheap replacements and my father's old wrench, but somehow it was enough. I started fixing chairs, tables, and broken cabinets for neighbors. Word spread fast. One afternoon, a woman named Mrs. Patel from the next building knocked on my door holding a cracked antique dresser. "They told me you're good with your hands," she said, half smiling. I laughed awkwardly. "I'd try." She left it with me, and 3 days later, when she came to pick it up, her eyes filled with tears. "It looks just like the day my husband bought it," she whispered. That was the first time I realized what I was doing wasn't just fixing things. I was restoring memories. I started listing small repair jobs online. People came with their broken furniture, old tools, forgotten family pieces. My hands were blistered, my back ached. But the more I worked, the more I felt connected to my father's voice echoing in my head. Steady, patient, proud. Eventually, I took a leap. I borrowed a tiny storage unit, turned it into a proper workspace, and hung a small wooden sign over the door. H&R Restorations. The H stood for him. The R for me. Every job I took, every piece I restored, felt like building a bridge between the man he was and the man I was becoming. Still, every success brought a pang of guilt. I wondered what he'd say if he saw me now, alone, estranged from Mom and Ryan, carving out a life from the scraps they left behind. But late one night, as I stood staring at that sign under the flickering light, I realized something that made me smile through tears. I wasn't rebuilding his workshop anymore. I was finally building mine. Time has a strange way of moving when you're doing something you love. It stops feeling like work and starts feeling like breathing. Within a year, my tiny workshop had turned into something real. People came from across town just to have me restore their old furniture. I saved every penny, reinvested it, and eventually rented a small storefront. A faded brick space with dusty windows that I cleaned until they shone. The day I hung the new sign outside, H&R Custom Works, I could almost hear my dad whisper, "Proud of you, son." Business grew fast. I started documenting my restorations online. Before and after photos, short clips of sanding and staining. Strangers loved the craftsmanship. Orders poured in. My inbox was full. I didn't even notice when one of my videos hit 500,000 views. For the first time, people saw my worth, and it had nothing to do with my family name. Meanwhile, I'd hear bits and pieces about Ryan through mutual friends. His perfect marriage wasn't so perfect anymore. The business he started after the wedding had failed, and he was drowning in debt. Mom, of course, was trying to hold everything together. One evening, she called out of the blue. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice trembled, softer than I remembered. "I saw your shop on Facebook," she said. "You're doing so well, sweetheart." "Your father would be proud." I forced a smile she couldn't see. "Thanks, Mom." She paused. You should come visit sometime. It's been too long." I told her I was busy and hung up. The call left me staring at the ceiling for hours. Part of me wanted to forgive them. Another part, the louder one, remembered the day I found that empty workshop, and as much as I tried to bury that memory, I could feel it rising again, inch by inch, ready to remind me that peace doesn't come easy. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd spoken to Ryan. Then one night my phone buzzed with his name. I almost ignored it, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, made me swipe. Answer. His voice was shaky. "Hey man, I need a favor." The words dragged old resentment right back to the surface. He told me his business had completely collapsed, his wife had left, and he'd moved back in with Mom. "We're kind of in a bad spot," he admitted. "Mom's struggling to keep up with the mortgage. You're doing well now. Maybe you could help out." For a moment, I just sat there in silence. The same family that sold my father's tools for wedding decor was now calling me for financial help. I wanted to hang up, but there was a tremor in his voice that didn't sound fake. It sounded desperate. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I drove back to my old neighborhood for the first time in years. The house looked smaller, sadder, paint peeling, porch sagging. I parked across the street and stared at the garage, the one that used to be my father's workshop. A stranger's car was parked where his old workbench used to stand. That was the moment it hit me. I could never go back. The home I missed didn't exist anymore. I sat there for an hour, gripping my father's wrench in my hand until the weight of everything came crashing down. The betrayal, the loneliness, the years I'd spent proving myself to people who never cared. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "You see this, Dad? They broke everything, and now they want me to fix it." For the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do. Help them and reopen old wounds, or walk away and finally be free. And deep down, I already knew which choice would hurt the most. A week later, I agreed to meet them for dinner. I told myself it was just to clear the air, to finally say what needed to be said, but truthfully, I wanted them to see what they'd thrown away. I arrived early, wearing the same work boots that had built everything I now owned. When they walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. Mom looked older, her eyes tired and hollow. Ryan looked like a ghost of himself, unshaven, nervous, clutching a cheap suit jacket that didn't fit. "Hey," he muttered, sliding into the booth. Mom followed, smiling weakly. "It's good to see you, sweetheart," she said. The small talk started, awkward, forced. Ryan explained how the business tanked after some bad deals. Mom added that she'd taken out a second mortgage to help him and was now behind on payments. Then came the real reason they'd called me. "We just need a little help," she said softly. "A loan. Enough to get us through the next few months." I stared at them, feeling that old ache crawl up my throat. "You sold Dad's tools to pay for his wedding," I said quietly. "Do you even remember that?" Mom's eyes welled up. "We did what we thought was right at the time." "What you thought was right destroyed me," I said. My voice cracked. "You sold the only piece of him I had left." Ryan rubbed his temples. "Look, man, we made mistakes, but this isn't about the past. We're family." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Family?" I leaned forward. "Family doesn't pawn off a dead man's legacy for party favors." The table fell silent. Mom whispered, "Your father would want you to forgive us." I met her gaze and said, "Maybe he would, but he'd never want me to be used again." I slid an envelope across the table. Not money, just a single photo of my shop. "I built this without you," I said. "And I'm keeping it that way." Then I stood up, left a few bills for my meal, and walked out. This time for good. After that dinner, I didn't hear from them for months. The silence felt strange, heavy but freeing. I poured everything back into my business. Orders doubled, then tripled. Soon, I hired 2 apprentices, young guys who reminded me of myself at their age. Hungry, uncertain, but full of potential. I told them what my father told me. Your hands will always tell the truth. Watching them learn made me realize something. I wasn't just fixing things anymore. I was passing something on. One morning, I got an email from a local magazine wanting to feature my story, From Loss to Legacy. When the article came out, it went viral. People shared it with captions like, "This is what real resilience looks like." I didn't expect what came next, calls from suppliers, partnerships, and invitations to speak at events. My father's name, once forgotten, was now tied to craftsmanship and integrity. The brand H&R Custom Works was thriving. Then, out of nowhere, Mom called again. Her voice was softer this time, humble, almost proud. "I saw your story," she said. "You've become everything your father dreamed of." I hesitated, unsure what to say. "Thanks," I replied flatly. She paused. "We've been struggling again. Ryan can't find steady work. Maybe you could hire him?" I took a long breath. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." "He's your brother," she whispered. "And Dad was your husband," I said quietly. "But you still sold his tools." There was silence, then soft sobbing on the other end. I didn't hang up, but I didn't say anything either. Eventually, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But as I looked around my workshop, my workers sanding wood, the sound of hammers echoing, I realized I didn't need her apology anymore. I had already reclaimed what they took, and soon I'd find the perfect way to honor my father for good. A year later, on the anniversary of my father's death, I stood in the middle of my workshop surrounded by the hum of machines and the scent of fresh-cut wood. The place was alive, every wall lined with tools, every bench busy. My apprentices were laughing over a design mistake, and for once, I didn't correct them. My father would have liked that, progress born out of patience. That morning, I loaded a few boxes into my truck and drove to the old community center downtown. Inside were rows of kids, teenagers from struggling families, learning basic trade skills. I'd been quietly funding the program for months, but today was different. Today, I brought something special. I opened the boxes to reveal new toolkits, each one engraved with the initials H&R. "These belong to you now," I told them. "Use them well. They're more than metal, they're second chances." As the kids cheered, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. This was what my father meant when he said, "Build something that lasts longer than anger." Later that evening, I drove to the cemetery. The sun was low, painting everything in gold. I knelt beside my father's grave and placed his old wrench, the one with the dent I made as a kid, on the stone. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I built something that lasts." My phone buzzed in my pocket, another call from Mom. For a second, I considered answering. But instead, I silenced it and let the breeze carry the quiet. As I stood up to leave, I looked back one last time. The wrench gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of everything I'd lost and rebuilt. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt free.